In the quiet of a small Greek village, life once moved with a rhythm as old as the olive trees that shaded its hills. Women carried water from the springs, sang lullabies to children, and tended gardens that had fed their families for generations. But that fragile peace was about to shatter. Whispers arrived first, rumours of Ottoman soldiers moving through the mountains, of villages burned, of families torn apart. Fear settled over the village like a cold mist, chilling the hearts of those who had never known war beyond stories. Among them, a young woman named Eleni clutched her sister's hand, sensing the change in the air. The Empire's shadow approached not as abstract power, but as a tangible, crushing force, and for the women, it would bring horrors no tale had yet captured. Eleni's story was not unique. Every household felt the tremor of impending violence, the creeping dread that their lives could be uprooted in a single night, the innocence of domestic routines, the weaving of cloth, the pounding of grain, the laughter of children suddenly became fragile, ephemeral memories. The women of the village understood what men often ignored. They were the first to suffer, the ones whose bodies and spirits could be marked, sold or stolen to serve the will of an empire indifferent to human life. The Ottomans' conquest was not only military but psychological. The terror inflicted on women before any battle was fought created fractures in communities, sapping courage and reshaping society from within. Families whispered about disappearances, about neighbours who never returned from the mountains, and about a dark world that existed beyond the familiar fields. Eleni's mother wept quietly each night, knowing that her daughter's fate might soon be written by hands far stronger than hers. This was the hidden wound history often overlooks, the deep personal suffering that preceded battles, the quiet annihilation of safety and hope. By focusing on the story of one village and one woman, the enormity of the Empire's cruelty becomes tangible. It is in these intimate horrors that the audience begins to understand the full weight of what captured Greek women endured. The stage is set not just for historical events, but for an emotional journey into fear, helplessness, and the looming shadow of systematic brutality. The silence that followed, thick and suffocating, was only the beginning. What comes next will be far darker than any whispered rumour or imagined threat, revealing the truths that generations tried to hide. The expansion of the Ottoman Empire was not only a tale of soldiers and battles, it was a story of strategy, control, and terror that reached into the homes of ordinary people. Greek women in particular became targets not because of their own actions, but because of the power they symbolized, the continuity of culture, lineage, and faith. Their capture was a deliberate act, a weapon designed to fracture communities and rewrite identities. The Empire's soldiers understood that by taking the women, they could dismantle the social fabric without ever setting foot on every battlefield. This calculated cruelty allowed the Ottomans to extend dominion not only over land, but over the very essence of life, turning fear into a tool of conquest. For centuries, Greek society had placed immense value on family honor and the protection of women, seeing them as keepers of culture, language, and tradition. Ottoman commanders recognized that breaking women's spirits meant weakening entire villages. Captured women were stripped of autonomy, transported to distant lands, and forced to adapt to new realities imposed by a foreign power. These acts were not random, they were deeply intentional, a psychological strategy designed to assert dominance and instill submission across generations. Entire villages could be demoralized by the mere knowledge that their daughters, sisters, and mothers might vanish in the night. The terror was not only physical. Stories circulated of women coerced into servitude, expected to navigate foreign hierarchies, and subjected to rituals meant to erase their previous identities. Faith, dress, and language became battlegrounds for control. A woman's resistance, whether silent or overt, was met with violence or further isolation, reinforcing the empire's power through fear. Communities learned that survival demanded obedience, but compliance carried the weight of shame and loss. Within this structure, women became both symbols and instruments of oppression, their bodies the terrain upon which empire was asserted. Yet the Ottoman targeting of Greek women also reflects the contrast between hope and horror. Many women attempted to protect their daughters, hide them in mountains, or send them to safer relatives, clinging to any fragile sense of agency. The tension between these acts of defiance and the unstoppable machinery of conquest created stories that were simultaneously heart-wrenching and heroic. Through these narratives, the audience begins to grasp the calculated moral complexity of the empire's expansion. It was not indiscriminate chaos, but methodical brutality that leveraged fear, suffering, and human vulnerability. Understanding why Greek women were singled out allows us to see the broader mechanisms of historical domination. It is a lens through which the audience can feel the intimate stakes of empire, the personal cost behind geopolitical strategy. By framing the story around this human suffering, we confront the uncomfortable truth that conquest is never merely about armies and territory. It is about erasing identities, bending societies, and controlling the very souls of those caught in history's machinery. Shadows of empire stretch far beyond the battlefield, reaching into every home and heart, leaving marks that would take generations to heal. Once captured, Greek women entered a world that defied comprehension, a journey that began not with battle cries but with silence, the silent terror of separation and displacement. Families were ripped apart in the dead of night, fathers left behind, husbands powerless, and children clinging to mothers who could offer no promise of survival. The march to the Ottoman centres was long, grueling, and designed to break both body and spirit. Women walked for days through unfamiliar terrain, their hands bound, their mouths forced into quiet, hearts pounding not only from exhaustion, but from the ever-present fear of what awaited them. Every step carried the weight of a stolen past, every glance behind a reminder of homes that might never see them again. During these forced journeys, women witnessed horrors that are scarcely recorded in history books. Villages burned to the ground, neighbours executed or enslaved, and the cries of the defenceless echoing across mountains became an unrelenting soundtrack to their fear. Some women were separated from their companions and sent to distant lands, never to see their families again. Those who resisted were beaten, humiliated, or worse, their punishment serving as a warning to others. Yet even in the face of overwhelming despair, small acts of courage persisted, holding hands with sisters, sharing scarce food, whispering prayers, and passing on memories of home became defiant acts of humanity. The psychological toll was immense. Women were forced to abandon their names, their faith, their familiar rituals, and their very sense of identity. Each day, survival demanded adaptation, learning new languages, obeying unfamiliar rules, and enduring the constant gaze of captors who measured compliance with cruelty. They were trained to internalize fear, to accept that any act of defiance could cost them their lives. The journey was not simply physical, it was a slow, meticulous erasure of self, a process designed to strip dignity and instill obedience. Historians may record the miles traveled, but the invisible scars etched into minds and souls remain largely unseen. Yet even within this relentless oppression, moments of human resilience shone. Women found ways to communicate through gestures and coded language, passing messages of hope and warnings. They shared stories of home and prayers, forming invisible networks of resistance that spanned the forced marches and servitude ahead. Every act of solidarity, however small, was an assertion of identity and a refusal to be entirely erased. This duality, the crushing weight of fear alongside the flickers of resistance, creates a tension that grips the heart, forcing the audience to confront both the depths of cruelty and the persistence of human spirit. By framing the journey in intimate detail, the audience experiences the horrors not as abstract history but as lived reality. Each mile walked, each night spent trembling in fear, reveals the complex interplay of power, violence, and survival. These women were not simply victims of war, they were witnesses, carriers of memory, and reluctant participants in a machinery that sought to rewrite their existence. The journey transformed them irrevocably, and through their stories, we understand the profound cost of empire, how the displacement and trauma of one generation reverberate through families, villages, and the collective consciousness of a people. In this chapter of suffering, the audience is drawn into an emotional landscape where hope and horror coexist, where every step forward is a testament to endurance, and where survival comes at a price that words alone struggle to convey. The human spirit is tested, broken, and, in rare moments, defiant, setting the stage for the next chapter, the grim reality awaiting those who reach the empire's heart, a world that would challenge every instinct of self-preservation and morality. Upon arrival in the heart of the Ottoman Empire, the captured Greek women entered a world that was both alluring and horrifying, a world of gilded walls, perfumed corridors, and rigid hierarchies designed to control every aspect of their existence. They were placed into households where luxury concealed brutality and beauty masked the constant erosion of autonomy. The harem, often romanticized in myths and exotic tales, was in reality a site of psychological domination, where every movement, every word, and every glance could determine life or death. Here, the empire's control was intimate and invasive, touching the deepest layers of identity and reshaping what it meant to be human. Women were stripped of their past lives immediately. Names were replaced with new identities, clothing with foreign styles, and routines with tasks that symbolized their new roles. Language became a weapon. Those who failed to learn quickly were punished, humiliated, or isolated. Faith too was contested. Some women were coerced into adopting new religious practices, their prayers transformed into rituals that belonged to another culture. Each enforced act of assimilation chipped away at memory and selfhood, leaving a landscape of internalized fear and confusion. The women who resisted, quietly, subtly, or openly, were often subjected to relentless punishment. Their bodies bore the marks of coercion, but the deeper wounds were psychological, invisible yet permanent, a testament to the empire's capacity for domination. Servitude was brutal and unrelenting. Women became the laborers, caretakers, and companions of households that saw them less as people than as instruments of power. Their days were measured by chores, obedience, and the endless negotiation of survival. Any deviation from expected behavior could trigger shame, violence, or exile within the household. Even when spared overt physical punishment, the weight of constant surveillance, verbal intimidation, and the looming threat of sexual exploitation created an environment where terror became normalized. Every act of compliance was both a survival strategy and a daily surrender of self, a moral compromise forced upon the innocent. Yet amidst these walls, small acts of defiance persisted. Some women memorized the names of others in secret, exchanged coded messages, or whispered prayers that no one could hear. These acts, though subtle, were radical. They allowed women to preserve fragments of their past and maintain a sense of identity, even as the empire sought to erase it. Friendship became a lifeline, shared grief a form of resistance, and collective resilience a quiet rebellion. In this duality of oppression and defiance lies the haunting power of their story. It forces the audience to confront not only the cruelty but also the astonishing endurance of the human spirit. The experience of the harem also reveals the moral complexity of survival. Some women, out of necessity or fear, complied fully, adopting new customs and loyalties in order to live. Others attempted escape or rebellion, risking unimaginable consequences. The empire demanded choices between equally devastating options: compliance with indignity or resistance with potential death. The tension between moral integrity and survival creates a psychological landscape that is both fascinating and horrifying, compelling viewers to empathize with impossible decisions. The audience begins to feel the weight of ethical ambiguity that history rarely fully captures, the cost of living under an omnipotent power where even thought could be policed. This chapter also reframes the idea of captivity. The horror of the harem was not simply in physical confinement, but in the daily erosion of autonomy, the deliberate reshaping of identity, and the subtle, relentless assault on the mind and soul. The audience comes to understand that these women were not passive victims. They were sentinels of memory, carriers of a culture and faith that the empire sought to overwrite. Their stories reveal the terrifying intimacy of oppression, where control extends beyond land and armies into the very architecture of human experience. By delving into the reality behind the myths, the audience witnesses a world where beauty is deceptive, survival is morally complex, and the human psyche is tested beyond imagination. It is here, within the gilded walls and structured cruelty, that the depth of suffering becomes most palpable. And the stark contrast between hope and despair, innocence and domination, is felt in every word. The grim reality of this existence sets the stage for a rare glimpse of courage, rebellion, and the enduring defiance of women who refuse to be wholly erased. Even in the heart of oppression, moments of defiance flickered like fragile flames, illuminating the courage that persisted despite unimaginable cruelty. Some women refused to submit entirely, crafting secret networks within harems and households to share information, comfort, and warnings. Simple gestures, a whispered message, a hidden token, a secret meeting, became acts of rebellion that required bravery beyond measure. The empire's apparatus of control was vast, yet the human spirit found ways to assert itself, to resist erasure, and to claim fragments of freedom even in confinement. Escape, however, was perilous. Women who attempted it faced lethal risks. Guards stationed at every exit, informants ready to report deviations, and the threat of public punishment to instill fear in others. Yet stories survive of those who outwitted captors, fled under the cover of night, or disguised themselves to reach sympathetic villages. These acts of resistance often demanded sacrifices, leaving loved ones behind, enduring hunger, and risking death at every step. Yet the very possibility of escape inspired hope, spreading quietly through households and villages, reminding captives that oppression, however absolute it seemed, could be challenged. Some women channeled their suffering into subtle forms of power. They learned to manipulate the social structures of their environments, influencing the decisions of guards, patrons, or administrators to protect themselves and others. These calculated acts of agency were both survival and subversion, exploiting loopholes in the empire's systems to maintain dignity or shield allies. The cleverness and courage required were extraordinary, reflecting a level of psychological resilience that history rarely credits. Through these narratives, the audience begins to perceive that resistance took many forms: physical, emotional, and intellectual, and that even small victories mattered immensely. The contrast between the brutality of captivity and these acts of defiance heightens the emotional tension of the story. It forces viewers to grapple with the duality of human experience under empire. The same system capable of unimaginable cruelty also created the conditions for heroism, ingenuity, and moral courage. Every escape, every whispered message, every act of solidarity becomes more than survival. It becomes testimony, a refusal to vanish entirely into history's shadows. The audience is drawn to feel both fear for the women's safety and awe at their resilience, deepening emotional investment in the narrative. Through these stories of rebellion and escape, the narrative also invites reflection on human agency under extreme oppression. The women's choices were never easy. Every decision carried profound consequences for themselves and those they sought to protect. Yet their courage endures, illustrating a timeless truth. Even when the world conspires to erase identity, hope, ingenuity, and solidarity can persist. This section, charged with suspense, moral complexity, and human triumph, prepares the audience for the final reckoning, the lingering consequences of trauma, the generational cost, and the moral reflection that closes the narrative. The tales of those who fought back remind us that history is not only written in the pages of conquerors, but in the whispered acts of the oppressed. In defiance, in fleeting moments of freedom, and in the preservation of memory, Greek women carved spaces of resistance that survived the empire's attempts to erase them. The audience leaves this section with a sense of awe and tension, emotionally invested in both the horror endured and the courage demonstrated, fully prepared to confront the legacy of suffering in the concluding chapter. The horrors endured by captured Greek women did not end with their immediate suffering. They rippled across generations, shaping families, communities, and collective memory in ways history often fails to acknowledge. The trauma of separation, violence, and forced assimilation left invisible scars, passed from mother to daughter, whispered in stories of fear, resilience, and loss. Children grew up knowing only fragments of their heritage. Women carried the weight of stolen identities, and entire villages bore the imprint of absence. This legacy is not merely historical, it is human, a testament to the enduring consequences of empire's cruelty and the resilience required to survive its machinery. Communities attempted to reconstruct what was shattered. Families searched for lost members, pieced together fragmented histories, and preserved cultural practices as acts of defiance against erasure. Yet the voids left by those who never returned, or who returned irrevocably changed, were permanent. Personal trauma intertwined with societal memory, creating layers of sorrow, suspicion, and resilience that would define the collective psyche of Greek communities for centuries. The empire's conquest was measured not only in territory gained, but in the generations of grief, displacement, and moral compromise it inflicted. The stories of these women, often silenced or sanitized by history, demand moral reflection. Their suffering forces a confrontation with uncomfortable truths: the cruelty of systems built on domination, the ethical compromises of survival, and the quiet heroism embedded in enduring oppression. History's omissions are as telling as its records, revealing which voices were deemed insignificant and which tragedies were allowed to fade into forgetfulness. For modern audiences, these narratives provoke empathy, outrage, and a deep understanding of the human cost of empire, lessons that resonate far beyond the borders of centuries-old conflicts. Yet within this bleak legacy, there remains a testament to strength. Survivors and their descendants carried fragments of identity, stories of endurance, and lessons of vigilance that shaped cultural resilience. Language, faith, customs, and memories became vessels of resistance, allowing communities to retain their essence even as the empire sought to overwrite it. The audience can feel both sorrow for what was lost and admiration for what endured, understanding that trauma does not only annihilate, it can also preserve, transform, and fortify. In reflecting on this history, viewers are invited to confront the broader implications of forgotten suffering. The story of captured Greek women is not just about cruelty, it is about the persistence of humanity, the costs of power unrestrained, and the moral responsibilities of remembering. By acknowledging these silenced voices, the audience participates in a reclamation of history, one that honours both the horror endured and the resilience demonstrated. The final emotional beat is one of reflection and solemnity, a reminder that the shadows of empire linger long after battles are won and territories claimed, and that the true measure of history lies not only in conquest but in the stories of those it sought to erase.